When Jessica moved into her new house on the outskirts of town, she had no idea what was in store for her. The house was old, with creaky floors and a gloomy atmosphere, but the price was too tempting to resist. On her first night, Jessica, exhausted from a long day, went to bed and quickly fell into a deep sleep. But closer to midnight, she was awakened by a strange noise. She opened her eyes and listened. A rustling sound, like someone scratching at wood, came from the closet. Jessica sat up in bed, hugging her knees, and stared at the closed closet doors. It's probably just mice, she tried to reassure herself. But the sound grew louder, and she could distinctly hear whispering, as if someone was murmuring in her ear, "Jessica." The next day, Jessica told her best friend Michael about what had happened. He laughed but agreed to come over that evening to check it out. When night fell, they both stood in front of the closet, armed with flashlights. "Let's open it and see what's inside," Michael suggested. Jessica nodded and slowly reached for the door handle. As soon as she cracked open the closet, a cold wind rushed out, and a ghostly figure appeared before them, resembling a human but with long, sharp claws and glowing red eyes. Michael jumped back, while Jessica froze in place. The creature reached out to her, its whisper becoming louder and more urgent, "You are mine." In a panic, Michael grabbed Jessica's hand and pulled her away from the closet. "Run," he shouted. They fled the room, slamming the door behind them. Jessica was trembling with fear, and Michael tried to calm her down. "We need to call the police or find a priest," Michael suggested. But Jessica, feeling a strange sense of determination, shook her head. "No, I have to deal with this myself." The next day, she found an old book in the town library that told of an ancient curse associated with their house. It said that many years ago, a man who lived there had made a deal with dark forces to gain immortality. Instead, he was cursed and trapped in the closet, doomed to feed on the fears of those who dared to open it. Returning home, Jessica prepared for the final showdown. She took the book filled with spells and protective symbols. That night, as darkness enveloped the house, she once again approached the closet and opened it. The monster burst out, emitting terrible sounds, but Jessica was ready. She began chanting the spells, and the creature started to disappear, its body twisting in agonizing pain. Soon, all that was left of it was a ghostly mist that slowly dissipated. Afterward, Jessica and Michael left the house for good. They knew that despite their victory, they could no longer stay there. The monster in the closet had been vanquished, but its dark power could return. They never told anyone about what had happened, but whenever the old house on the outskirts of town was mentioned, Jessica and Michael would exchange glances, filled with worry and understanding. When the Johnson family moved into their new home in a small town, they were filled with joy and hope. The house was spacious, with a large kitchen and cozy bedrooms, but there was one corner that immediately caught the parents' attention: a dark and eerie basement. Its wooden door, hanging on rusty hinges, looked as if it hadn't been opened in a long time. 12-year-old Tommy, the youngest son of the family, was the most curious member. From the first day, he began exploring every nook and cranny of the house. One evening, when the parents went out for a meeting and his older sister Sarah was studying in her room, Tommy decided to go down to the basement. Lifting a dusty cloth, Tommy opened the door and turned on the old lamp hanging from the ceiling. At first, he didn't notice anything unusual, but soon he heard a faint whisper coming from the depths of the basement. He froze in place, his heart beating faster. The next day, Tommy told Sarah about the basement. Although she was 5 years older, Sarah always supported her brother in his explorations. "Let's check it out together," she suggested, though she felt a slight unease. Armed with flashlights, they went down to the basement. The place was filled with old boxes and useless junk, but in the far corner stood a strange wooden box with intricate carvings. The whispering grew louder as they approached the box. Tommy dared to open it, and they found an old doll covered in dust, with cold, glassy eyes. From that moment, strange things started happening in the house. At night, they heard footsteps, as if someone was walking through the hallways. Light bulbs flickered, and objects disappeared only to reappear in the most unexpected places. One day, while the whole family was gathered for dinner, their dog Roxy suddenly started barking at the basement door, as if someone was there. At first, the parents didn't pay much attention to the children's stories, attributing everything to their vivid imagination. But one night, When everyone was asleep, Sarah heard Tommy crying. She ran to his room and saw him standing in front of the basement door, as if in a trance, trying to open it. Sarah woke her parents, and they all went down to the basement together. Father John took a crowbar and pried open the box where the doll was lying. Beneath it, they discovered an old diary belonging to a former owner of the house. From the diary, they learned a horrifying story. It turned out that many years ago, a family with a little girl named Emily lived in the house. Emily was very attached to her doll and said it was her best friend. But one day, the girl disappeared without a trace, and the family could never find her. Since then, they had hidden the doll in the basement, hoping that its eerie whispering would never bother anyone again. Realizing that the doll was connected to Emily's disappearance, John decided to destroy it. He took the doll and threw it into the fireplace. The doll began to crackle and melt, emitting a piercing scream that sent shivers down everyone's spine. When the doll was completely burned, the house filled with a strange smell, and suddenly everything became quiet. Since then, no more strange occurrences happened, and the family regained their peace. After this incident, John, Mary, Sarah, and Tommy tried not to think about the horrors of the basement. But every time they heard about old houses with dark corners, a cold fear arose in their hearts, reminding them that sometimes it's better not to know what lurks in the shadows. In one small town there lived a family who moved into an old house. The house was filled with antique furniture and various antiques left behind by the previous owners. Among all this splendor, one painting especially stood out, hanging in the living room. It depicted a gloomy forest with a mysterious silhouette of a woman in the foreground. The family did not attach much importance to this picture, but soon strange things began to happen. On the first night, when they went to bed, strange rustling sounds and quiet steps were heard in the house. Every time someone from the family approached the painting, it seemed to him that the woman's eyes were watching them. One evening, the family's youngest son, Max, decided to take a closer look at the painting. He noticed that the woman's eyes seemed to glow slightly in the dark. The boy felt a strange chill running down his back and hurried to return to his parents. Every day, the strangeness only intensified. Things in the house began to move on their own, and muffled voices were heard at night. One day, the mother of the family, Lisa, woke up from the feeling that someone was standing at her bed. Opening her eyes, she saw the pale silhouette of the woman from the painting, which silently disappeared into the air. Horrified, Lisa turned to a local historian who knew everything about the old house. He told a terrible story. It turned out that a woman named Elizabeth, who was an artist, once lived in the house. Her husband died under mysterious circumstances, and, immersed in grief, she painted that very picture. They said that she put part of her soul into it. Shortly after the painting was completed, Elizabeth disappeared and was never seen again. Realizing that Elizabeth's spirit was connected to the painting, the family decided to get rid of it. But it turned out that this is not so easy to do. Every time they tried to remove the painting from the house, it mysteriously returned to its place in the living room. In desperation, the family invited a priest to bless the house and perform the banishing ceremony. During the ceremony, strong gusts of wind began, and the painting seemed to be engulfed in flames, but it did not harm it. The priest read prayers, and at some point the woman in the picture began to disappear, as if dissolving into thin air. After long and painful hours, the ceremony was completed. The painting lost its mystical properties, and the family was finally able to take it out of the house and burn it. From that day on, there were no more strange things in the house, and the family could live in peace again. But every time they passed by the place where the painting hung, they involuntarily felt a slight chill, reminding themselves of the spirit of Elizabeth, forever locked in her gloomy creation.